Dear people watching and listening, Assalamu alaikum. Kindly like and share this video and subscribe to my YouTube channel. Please support my channel by contributing to my Patreon account so that I can continue making the audiobook series. Salahuddin al-Ayyubi, Volume 2, The Establishment of the Ayyubid State. Start of Part 2 of Chapter 5. Sufi khanqahs. The word khanqah is a Persian word which originally means a dining table or the place where the king eats. After that it was applied to the khanqahs or houses, which were established by kings and emirs who were seeking to do acts of righteousness and good deeds by providing accommodation for Muslim strangers who came to their countries, and by giving them food and educating them. Even though the 5 daily obligatory prayers were offered in special rooms in these khanqahs that were set aside for prayer, Jummah prayers were not held there. The khanqah, which was a house for Sufis, was more like a school, because it was in fact a school for the masses, for those who devoted themselves to a life of asceticism and austerity, whether they were ordinary people or artisans and craftsmen who were trying to implement the principle of enjoining what is good and forbidding what is evil in the streets and markets. Thus the khanqah resembled a school in appearance and function. To sum up, the khanqah in Islam was something like a place of knowledge and worship that played an important religious, social, and cultural role in the life of Muslim society from the beginning. At first they were institutions for the schools of jurisprudence and hadith, and then they became beacons of culture because of their libraries which contained books on many branches of knowledge. There were many types of employment in the khanqah, such as the sheikh of the khanqah, the imam, supervisor of its endowment, teachers of the schools of jurisprudence, assistant teachers, oculists, surgeons, pharmacists, librarians, keeper of attendance records, muazzin, supervisor of the bathhouse, supervisor of the kitchen, cook, servant of the sheikh, caretaker of the wooden chest in which copies of the Quran were kept, doorkeepers, housekeepers, drawers of water, hewers of wood, and so on. If this number of positions indicates anything, it indicates the number of various jobs that there were in these khanqahs. Each of these people was paid a salary in cash for his work, and the man in charge of the endowment made sure that the salary was appropriate to how well off he was and his position in society. That was in addition to the rewards they received in the form of food such as vegetables, meat, rice, milk, honey, sweets, and so on, as well as clothing, soap, and other provisions that were distributed to them in abundance. Salahuddin followed the method of his master Nuruddin by paying attention to these institutions and the Sufis who came to them. He treated them kindly and consulted them about many issues, and he respected their scholars, sat with them and listened to their advice. They stood with him in his wars against the crusaders in many battles. Salahuddin had grown up with his father Najmuddin Ayyub, who was generous, had a good attitude, and was very kind to the poor and Sufis, with whom he often mixed. Ibn Kathir noted, he was courageous, prayed a great deal, and sponsored a khanqah in Egypt and another in Damascus. In Baalbek, Ibn Khalikan saw a Sufi khanqah that was called Najmiya, after Najmuddin, and he praised him for being very righteous. Nevertheless, the great influence on Salahuddin's attitude and character came from his master Nuruddin, from whom he had learnt ways of doing good, to love people who are close to Allah, and to strive in various ways of jihad. He followed the same path that Nuruddin had followed before him, before he started to liberate the land from the clutches of the crusaders. He spent 12 years from 570 to 582 Hijri, striving to achieve unity and restore the material and spiritual strength of Islam. So he increased the building of ribats, khanqahs, and hospices, turning them into military and regular schools. As Safadi said, he superseded Nuruddin in all of that. Salahaddin is regarded as having been the first one to introduce these places into Egypt. Al-Qashandi said, with regard to khanqahs and ribats, they were unknown in Egypt before the time of the Ayyubid state. They were introduced by Salahaddin ibn Ayyub. Al-Maqrizi, as-Sayyuti, and others agreed with him on this point. Salahaddin was the first one to build khanqahs for the Sufis in Egypt, and he established many endowments for them. Their inhabitants were known for their knowledge and righteousness, and prominent people, from whom blessing was sought, were appointed as their sheikhs, in addition to their positions as wazirs, amirs, state administrators, army commanders, and leaders of troops. These things attracted the attention of the Andalusian traveler Ibn Jubair during his journey to the east, and he said, among the features of this land, that is Egypt, and its sources of pride, which are in fact attributable to its sultan, are the schools and ribats which are set up for the seekers of knowledge and worshippers. The sultan who has introduced these good traditions is Salahaddin. He is Salahaddin the Victorious. May Allah increase him in righteousness and guidance. Wherever Salahaddin went and halted, he built Sharia schools and khanqahs side by side. During Salahaddin's conquest of Jerusalem in 583 Hijri, he ordered the Muslims to preserve the Church of the Resurrection, and he built nearby a school for the Shafi'i scholars of jurisprudence, and a ribat for the righteous Sufis, and established endowments to support them. Thus he did a favor to both groups. During his conquest of Acre, he allocated half of the house of the Hospitallers as a ribat for the Sufis, and the other half as a school for the scholars of jurisprudence. We see nothing strange in these actions of Salahaddin, especially since we know that both groups accompanied him during his campaigns and conquests, and the historians have highlighted to us the presence of these two groups, especially during the conquest of Jerusalem. Ibn Khalikan said, his conquest was great, and was witnessed by a number of scholars and ragged ascetics. This fact is reinforced by the words of Ibn al-Wardi in his Tarikh, where he said, many of the ragged ascetics and scholars were present at his conquests in Egypt and Syria, and none of them stayed behind. Salahaddin would take Sufi scholars with him so that he could seek their opinions and consult them, in addition to the fact that their presence was regarded as a strong incentive for their followers to fight with rare courage. The character of Salahaddin was liked by the Sufis. He followed a path of asceticism, not keeping enough wealth to be subjected to zakah, and not leaving behind in his treasury anything but 47 dirhams and a single gold piece. He left behind no property, house, real estate, garden, village, cultivated land, or any other type of wealth. In this world he was content with the shade of a tent blown right and left by the wind. For Salahaddin, gold and mud were all the same. Ibn Shaddad noted, I heard him say in a discussion that there may be people who look upon wealth as they look upon dust, and it was as if he was referring to himself. There are many reports which confirm the asceticism of Salahaddin and the simplicity of his food and clothing, whilst he bestowed generous gifts upon the scholars of jurisprudence and Sufis, and established entire villages, with all that they contained of resources and profits, to serve as endowments for hospices and houses for the poor. Salahaddin built inns in isolated places far away from civilization, and on the routes that connected cities, to serve wayfarers and travelers. Ibn Jubair saw the inn that Salahaddin built on the road between Homs and Damascus, which was called Khan as-Sultan. The Emir Baha ad-Deen Qaraqoosh also built wayfarers' inns. Salahaddin paid attention to attracting scholars and the Sufis. He established the first khanqah for the Sufis in Egypt and devoted it to the poor Sufis who came from all over the world. He established great endowments for them and appointed a sheikh for them to run their affairs, who was known as the Sheikh of Sheikhs. Al-Maqsi stated that its Sufi inhabitants were known for knowledge and righteousness, and the number of people living there was 300. The Sultan allocated bread and sweets for them every day, and 40 dirhams per year for clothing, and he built a bathhouse for them nearby. If any of them wanted to travel, he would give him money to help him reach his destination. This attention that was paid to Sufi affairs was intended to serve several aims, some of which had to do with the Sunni revival movement. Although moderate Sufism was a trend which was respected by both rulers and common folk at that time, this kind of attention that was paid to it in Egypt in particular was a deliberate action aimed at achieving a specific goal. Perhaps the reason for this was that the Fatimids in Egypt had failed, despite their various methods of calling people to their madhab, in changing the beliefs of the majority of Egyptians. But they had easily affected their emotions. The displays of grief and mourning for al-Hussein, and the celebrations of the birthdays of Ahl al-Bayt, and the attention paid by the Fatimids to these and other occasions, all of that had had an effect on the Egyptians' emotions, and traces of that can still be seen today. Salahaddin tried to attract Sunni scholars to Egypt from all over, to contribute their knowledge and ideas to the Sunni revival movement. There was another important aspect which it was essential to fulfill, and turn it away from the direction in which it had been going under the Fatimids, and find another outlet for it. That was the people's emotions, which the Fatimids had easily dominated. The Sunni Sufis and their followers were among those who could fulfill this aspect at that time, with their easygoing attitude, their shunning of worldly delights, and their ability to address people in their gatherings, which were usually for the purpose of exhortation, zikr, and so on. Thus Salahaddin, like Nuruddin before him, was able to benefit from the Sunni Sufi groups in the Sunni revival movement, and in confronting Shi'ism and the Crusader invasion. Social reform. Social life at the time of Salahaddin was characterized by its serious nature, resistance to the Franks and striving against the enemy. It was far removed from displays of ostentation and extreme extravagance, or false displays of greatness. Salahaddin, may Allah have mercy on him, set a good example to his troops and his subjects by wearing ordinary clothing, eating coarse food, and mixing with people in a humble manner. Ali-Mad al-Isfahani said, describing his clothing and his way of mixing with people, he wore nothing but that which it is permissible to wear, such as linen, cotton, and wool, and anyone who sat with him would not feel that he was sitting with a sultan, because of his humbleness. Salahaddin was an athletic man who loved horsemanship and ball games, and encouraged others to engage in them too. He would ride to watch ball games and polo after Zohar prayer, accompanied by his men. When he reached the field, he would dismount and watch the game, and the players would continue playing until the Azan for Asr prayer. He would also take part in these games with his inner circle and would go out to play with some of his friends. Hunting and fishing were also beloved pastimes. People would go out in groups or alone to hunt birds and catch fish, or to hunt geese and rabbits. If this phenomena indicates anything, it is indicative of complete readiness and preparedness to engage in battle, with extreme bravery and unparalleled courage. Among the major reforms that Salahuddin achieved in Muslim society was suppressing manifestations of promiscuity and immorality that were widespread at the time of the Fatimids, especially on special occasions and festivals, such as the Nowruz festival. If we want to know the extent of this immorality that was widespread in Egyptian society before the days of Salahuddin, let us listen to what al-Maqsi has said. Evil was manifest during the festival of Nowruz, when there would be a large gathering, and effeminate men and immoral women would gather beneath the Pearl Palace, where the Caliph could see them, with musical instruments in their hands. Voices would become loud and wine would be drunk in the streets, and the people would throw water at one another, or water and wine, or water mixed with filth. If a decent person made the mistake of coming out of his house, he would be met by people who would sprinkle him and make his clothes dirty, and humiliate him, and he would either have to give something to ransom himself or be exposed. Salahuddin abolished these immoral goings-on and blatant evil, and restored an innocent and clean life. He brought back to them the morals and etiquette of Islam. Another of the corrupt phenomena that he abolished was the innovated occasions and festivals, such as the innovations on the day of Ashura, which was a day of grief and mourning for the Fatimids, on which there was a lot of weeping and wailing out loud. People did not work and the markets were closed, and there was widespread chaos, as if each individual had lost the dearest of people to him. Salahuddin was able to put an end to these blameworthy customs and innovations. With regard to his generosity towards the people and his distribution of gifts to them, there is much to be said. He would give like one who did not fear poverty. He would give like one who did not fear poverty, because the way he regarded wealth was like that of one who was looking at dust. We have already seen that when he died he left behind in his treasury nothing but 47 silver dirhams and a single gold piece. He left behind no property, house, real estate, garden, village, cultivated land or any other type of wealth. Instead, he spent a great deal of wealth on restoration projects and preparing the means of warfare, and on deserving cases among the people, until he achieved complete security in society where no one was in need. The state was strong and all people enjoyed a good living. This is what this just sultan and heroic leader achieved. Among the actions for which Salahuddin will be forever remembered is his abolition of many of the taxes which burdened society and caused the people great harm, such as the taxes that were imposed by the Emir of Mecca on the pilgrims. The ruler of Mecca had ordered that the pilgrims pay the levies of Mecca in advance in Jeddah, and the pilgrims were treated unfairly. Salahuddin abolished this entire system and compensated the governor of Mecca by paying him a lump sum. Every year he sent to him 8,000 measures of wheat and stipulated that it be distributed among the people of the two holy sanctuaries. Salahuddin also abolished the taxes that were imposed on the people, and with one lump sum paid from the treasury, he benefited the people of the two holy sanctuaries. Another thing that points to his good intentions, his keenness to keep the people safe and unite the Ummah, and his care to avoid wrongdoing, is the advice he gave to his son al-Malik al-Zahir, whom he appointed as governor of Aleppo. He advised him, as recorded by his Qadi ibn Shaddad, I urge you to fear Allah, for it is the root of all goodness, and I enjoin you to adhere to that which Allah commands you, for it is the means of your salvation. I warn you against shedding blood and indulging therein, for blood never sleeps. I urge you to be kind to the people and to take care of them, for you are my trustee and the trustee of Allah over them. I urge you to be kind to the emirs, state officials, and prominent people, for I have not attained the position I have attained except by being kind to people. Do not bear grudges against anyone, for that will not leave anyone. Watch the relationship between you and people, for sins concerning them cannot be forgiven except with their consent. But what is between you and Allah will be forgiven if you repent, for He is the most generous. These are the most important social and moral reforms undertaken by Salahaddin, which enabled Muslim society during his rule to flourish with the noblest character, best traditions, and finest etiquette. Infrastructure. Another of these reforms was the attention that he paid to the wall of Cairo, most of which had been destroyed and no longer prevented anyone from entering or leaving. Thus he rebuilt the wall. He appointed as supervisor of this rebuilding of the wall at-Tawashi Baha ad-Deen Qaraqoosh. The wall extended around the cities that formed the city of Cairo at that time, namely the city of Fustat, which was founded by Amr ibn al-As, the city of al-Askar, which was founded by Saleh ibn Ali al-Abbasi, and the city of Cairo, which was founded by Jawhar as-Siqili. The aim behind building this wall was to protect the city from aggressors. In addition to building the wall, he built al-Jabal, the citadel of the mountain, to defend Cairo from treacherous attacks, but he was not able to finish building it all because he was distracted by wars in various arenas. This citadel is regarded as one of the fortified relics of Egyptian history, which has been altered frequently down throughout the ages. Other citadels built by Salahaddin include Qalatsina, which he built in the Sinai Peninsula, 57 kilometers northeast of the city of As-Suwais, which is the Suez. To the south of the citadel, he also built two neighboring mosques and cisterns to provide water. On the doors of the cisterns the following lines were written: In the name of Allah, the most gracious, the most merciful. May Allah send blessings upon our Master Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. May Allah cause the kingdom of our Lord An-Nasir Salah al-Dunya wa-Deen, the King of Islam and the Muslims, the Caliph of the Commander of the Faithful, to abide forever. This cistern was built by al-Malik Ali ibn al-Nasir al-Adil al-Muzaffar. Construction was completed in Shaban 590 Hijri. Professor Naum Shukair says in his book Tarikh Sina wal Arab. He passed by the citadel and the two mosques, and he saw that the citadel had a large gate on its northwest side, and over the lintel of the door there was a square historical Arabic stone, on which was carved in relief the name of Salahaddin, and the words, In the name of Allah, the most gracious, the most merciful. May Allah send blessings upon Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. May Allah cause the kingdom of our Lord Al-Malik An-Nasir Salahaddin, the Sultan of Islam and the Muslims, Yoosuf al-Adil An-Nasir, to abide forever. Jamadi Usani, 583 Hijri. Salahuddin's interest in building military fortifications was not everything. He also paid attention to developing Jazirat al-Rawdah and Giza, building the Nilometer, and digging irrigation ditches, as well as building hospitals, schools, and khanqahs. At the time of Salahuddin, the cities of Giza and al-Rawdah were the most important part of the country. He also paid attention to developing Jazirat al-Rawdah and Giza, building the Nilometer and digging irrigation ditches, as well as building hospitals, schools, and khanqahs. At the time of Salahuddin, the cities of Giza and al-Rawdah were the most important part of the country. Ibn Jubair says in his Rihlah, in Giza there is a large market every Sunday, where many congregate. Between it and Fustat there is an island, al-Rawdah, with fine houses and commanding belvederes, which is a resort for entertainment and diversion. Between this island and Fustat, there is a canal from the Nile. On this island is a congregational mosque in which the khutbah is delivered. Beside this mosque is the Nilometer, which measures the Nile's increase or decrease. In it there is stone and marble, and other kinds of beauty and artistry. Salahuddin built irrigation channels and developed a fleet, and he established a special department for the fleet that was called Diwan al-Ustul, which he handed over to his brother Al-Adil. Alexandria and Damietta were the most important seaports in Egypt, and Fustat and Kos were the most important Nile ports. In them were built the warships that guarded those borders, and went out on naval campaigns to make the word of Islam prevail, and its banner fly in all places. Salahuddin thought of Alexandria and its strategic importance in resisting the Crusader venture, and ordered that its walls and towers be rebuilt. He also built a hospital there, and tended to its bridges and irrigation ditches, in order to improve the lot of its farmers. Many factors contributed to the development of infrastructure at the time of Salahuddin, including religious, geographic, political, administrative, economic, military, social, and cultural factors. Dr. Adnan al-Harisi discussed them in detail in his useful book, Umran al-Qahira wa Khutatuha fi Ahd Salahuddin al-Ayyubi. Dr. Izzuddin Faraj discussed the features of the Ayyubid style of development. The most important feature of development in Ayyubid Egypt was those fortifications with their towers and gates, which were added to the walls and citadels. The gates which Salahuddin built were of the staggered type, which was a new design aimed at making fortresses stronger. The gate did not go through the wall in a straight line like an ordinary gate. Rather, the enemy was forced to go through a gate between two towers, in which there were openings through which arrows could be shot into an exposed area, where there was no protection for those who were coming in. There was also a new construction element that was used by Salahuddin in these fortifications, which was a stone balcony that jutted out from the wall. This was equipped with narrow openings from which the troops could shoot their arrows at the attacking enemy from the front and sides. Professor Croswell was proven that Eastern architectural elements, as well as the design of schools with intersecting halls, were established and developed in Egypt, and this idea did not come from elsewhere. During this era, the use of decorative plaster and carpentry work also continued to flourish, and Naskhi calligraphy appeared alongside Kufi calligraphy. Administrative reform. The emergence of the Ayyubid state had a great impact on the creation of new official administrative developments, which differed from the traditional Fatimid model. Al-Qalqashandi states that when the Ayyubid state took over from the Fatimid state, it differed from it in the way of running affairs and changed most of its features. When the Ayyubids arrived from the Muslim East, they brought with them a new administrative spirit, which was based on the Seljuk, Zangid, and Abbasid systems. Many changes were introduced into the administration, among the most prominent of which were new administrative posts, such as the Sultan's deputy, which reflected the necessity of the Sultan leaving the country because of the wars with the crusaders. Hence there was a need for someone to act as his deputy during his absence. Salahaddin divided his state into administrative regions, each of which had its own resources and distinct character, such as Egypt, Greater Syria, northern Iraq, Nubia, the Maghreb, Yemen, and the Hijaz. He spent most of the years of his rule on the battlefield, exercising a policy of planning, executing, and supervising, while guiding the overall policy of the state. He allowed freedom of execution to the governors with regard to local issues, such as jihad, preparedness, and defense, according to the circumstances and resources of each province. This is what is known in modern parlance as decentralization. In fact, Salahuddin did not hold all the reins of authority in his own hands, despite the fact that he was also running the affairs of the central government. It is most likely that he realized that the distribution of power would make each governor watch over the others and compare himself to the others in the way in which he exercised his special authority. Dividing the work among a number of qualified people also achieved a number of advantages that had to do with the quality and speed of work. Cairo was the center of his government, where his deputies and viziers lived, and whence his commands were issued to different regions, and Greater Syria was his theater of war and the arena of his jihad against the crusaders. He appointed the highest state positions to his sons, relatives, and the closest of people to him, so as to protect his system and method of ruling and leadership. When selecting them, his choice was based on a rational approach, to the extent that he dismissed his son al-Malik al-Tahir Ghazi from his post as governor of Aleppo and gave it to his brother al-Adil when the interests of the state called for that. When he annexed an Islamic emirate into his state, he would leave its rulers in place if they agreed to come under his authority and implement his policies to serve his aims, rather the aims of Islam as a whole. If any of them refused, he would allow him to go wherever he wanted. He used peaceful methods in order to reach an understanding with them. If any of them rebelled against him, he would overlook his mistakes and receive him with a cheerful face and honor him a great deal, as he did in the case of Taqi-ad-Din Umar, when he wanted to rebel against him and go to the Maghreb after he was dismissed from his post as governor of Egypt. Salahuddin paid attention to the public interest when appointing or dismissing governors, in addition to the political and military circumstances of the state. His conduct was distinguished by justice and humility. He did not hurt the feelings of anyone, or put himself above anyone or behave arrogantly towards anyone. Tyranny was not part of his nature. Baha ad-Din Qaraqoosh. Baha ad-Din Qaraqoosh was one of the administrators of the Ayyubid state. He was a Roman Byzantine slave who had fled from one of the villages of Asia Minor and moved from one land to another until he reached Syria. Then he joined the entourage of Asad ad-Din Shirkuh, who recognized his potential for smartness and courage. So he drew him close to him and started training him in horsemanship and developing his fighting skills. In Damascus, He was called Baha ad-Deen ibn Abdullah al-Asadi, after Asad ad-Din Shirkuh, who had brought him, trained him, and taught him, and was the cause of his embracing Islam. Baha ad-Din soon climbed the army ladder and reached the position of commander. At the head of this army was the heroic leader Asad ad-Din Shirkuh, who had entered Egypt during the final years of the Fatimid state. Later on, Egypt had ended up in the hands of the commander Salahaddin al-Ayyubi, which led to the demolishing of the Fatimid state, and the Ayyubid state was established in its stead. The meaning of the name Qaraqoosh in Turkish is osprey, which is a bird of prey. This name is given to a man for his chivalry and courage. The name is composed of two words, Qara meaning black, and Kush meaning bird or eagle. Ibn Khalikan mentioned some detail of his life story, saying, "It was said that he was the servant of Asad ad-Din Shirkuh, the paternal uncle of the Sultan Salahaddin, who manumitted him. When Salahaddin took full control of Egypt, he put him in charge of the palace. Then he acted as his deputy in Egypt for a while. Salahaddin delegated the affairs of Egypt to him, and he relied on him to manage its affairs. He was a fortunate man, and a man of high ambition." Ibn Kathir wrote a biography of him in Al-Bidayah wa Nihaya. The Amir Baha ad-Din Qaraqoosh was a scholar and faqih, but he devoted himself to administrative and military service. The life of the Amir Baha ad-Din Qaraqoosh was filled with great achievements, heroic acts, and sincerity towards Islam and the Muslims during the time he was close to the leader Salahaddin al-Ayyubi, and after he died, which made him a focal point for the plots of those who envied him and the enemies of Islam and the Muslims. Among the actions that were delegated to him and in which he did well were guarding the Fatimid palace. When Salahaddin appointed him to guard the Fatimid palace, so that none of its treasures could be leaked to the opponents of Ahl Sunnah, the Emir undertook this mission in the best manner and guarded the Fatimid palace with an eye that never slept. The conspirators tried in vain to get hold of the wealth they needed to spend on this conspiracy, and they did not succeed. This was one of the factors that contributed to the failure of the conspiracy. This was the conspiracy of the Caliph's confidant, which we discussed previously. The Fatimid palace contained treasures such as no eye had ever seen. Fine clothing, valuable jewelry, splendid treasures, precious stones such as rubies and emeralds, golden artifacts, silver vessels, necklaces and pearls. The Amir Qaraqoosh guarded these treasures in the best manner, until Allah granted victory to the commander Salahaddin and gave him power in the land. Building Qalat al-Jabal. When the commander Salahaddin returned from Syria and saw what the Amir Baha ad-Din had achieved during his absence, in which the Amir had demonstrated his brilliance and great experience in engineering, he ordered him to build for him a citadel to protect Fustat, and left him to choose its location and determine its size. The Amir Baha ad-Din selected an elevated piece of land in Jabal al-Muqattam, which overlooks the whole of Cairo, to be the site of the citadel. He started to build it in 572 Hijri, and the construction of the citadel was part of a series of fortifications and military installations undertaken by the Ayyubids to secure the cities of Egypt such as Fustat and Cairo. Hence the constructions had the outward appearance of fortifications, with towers and strong gates, and inside there were splendid buildings for the Sultan, which impressed all the travelers and historians who visited them. The citadel was built on a high rocky hill, which increased its strength and solidity. Ibn Jubair commented, "We also looked upon the building of the citadel, an impregnable fortress adjoining Cairo, which the Sultan thinks to take as his residence, extending its walls until it enfolds the two cities of Fustat and Cairo. The forced laborers on this construction, and those executing all the skilled services and vast preparations, such as sawing the marble, cutting the huge stones, and digging the fosse that girdles the walls noted above, a fosse hollowed out with pickaxes from the rock to be a wonder amongst the wonders of which traces may remain, were the foreign Roman prisoners whose numbers were beyond computation. There was no cause for any but them to labor on this construction." Bir Yoosuf, which means Yoosuf's well. Inside the citadel, the Amir Baha ad-Deen built an amazing well that was dug very deep into the rock. This well until today is still called Bir Yoosuf, or Yoosuf's well, after Yusuf Salahaddin. Professor Ali Pasha Mubarak says, "The well known as al-Halazun, which means the snail, which is located inside the citadel, is the work of Qaraqoosh during the days of Salahaddin. It was dug to provide water inside the citadel if it were to be besieged by the enemy." The walls of Cairo, the citadel, and Fustat. After building the citadel in 567 Hijri, the Amir Baha ad-Din extended the northern wall of Fatimid Cairo to the west until it reached the port of al-Maqsi on the Nile, which is now the location of Masjid al-Fath al-Jadid in Ramses Square. This is the same site that was occupied by Jamia Aulad an-Nan before it was transferred. He also extended the wall eastwards until it joined the old northern Fatimid wall, which lay east of the quarter of ad-Darb al-Ahmar. He extended the third wall from south of the citadel to Bab al-Qurafa, at the city of Fustat, a distance of 5.5 kilometers. The wall that was built by the Amir Qaraqoosh was the third wall that surrounded Cairo at that time. The first wall had been built by the Byzantine general Jawhar al-Siqili. The second was built by the Fatimid Wazir and army commander Badr al-Jamali, and the third was built of stone by the Amir Qaraqoosh. The wall went around the four cities which formed the city of Cairo at that time, which were Fustat, Al-Askar, Cairo or Al-Qahira, and Fustat. The Great Wall of Cairo was regarded as one of the greatest military installations built during this era. The one who was appointed to supervise this work was the Amir Baha ad-Din Qaraqoosh, who demonstrated brilliance, vast experience, and great energy in building military installations. Every time Salahaddin needed to build any military installation, he sought the help of the Amir Baha ad-Din. The bridges of Giza and the citadel of al-Maqsi. Among the constructions and military installations built by the Amir Baha ad-Din were the bridges of Giza, which are located beneath the bridge that connects the Nile and the pyramids, in the direction of the city of Fustat. It was stated that he demolished the small pyramids that were scattered in Giza, and took the stones to build the bridges. Another was the citadel of al-Maqsi, which was the name of a large tower built by the Amir Baha ad-Din at the Bridge of the Caliphs, near the Jame Mosque at the end of the wall of Cairo, at Bab al-Bahar. Its location is the site where the Okaf building and the Ratib Pasha building now stand, next to Jami-ul Adnan, in the direction of al-Bahriya al-Sharqiyya, in Bab al-Hadid Square. As governor of Acre, his renovation of its walls. In Muharram 585 Hijri, Salahaddin went to Acre and stayed there, putting its affairs in order. He put the Emir Baha-ad-Din Qaraqoosh in charge of it and ordered him to develop it and renovate its walls. We will discuss Acre and what happened there below. Origin of the saying, as harsh and irrational as the ruling of Qaraqoosh. Qaraqoosh was one of the bravest and most brilliant commanders. On one occasion he was captured and was ransomed for 10,000 dinars, and Salahaddin rejoiced greatly when he was ransomed. It seems that the way he ran the affairs of Cairo was very wise and decisive. He removed the Fatimids from power and kept a tight grip on their remnants, so they could find no way to fight him, except by spreading rumors and trying to tarnish his reputation. So they wrote a book about him called Al-Fashush fi Ahkam Qaraqoosh, which means strange stories about the rule of Qaraqoosh, which is nothing more than rumors which are repeated foolishly by our contemporaries. Ibn Khalikan stated that the people attributed bizarre verdicts to the Emir Baha-ad-Din Qaraqoosh when he was serving as Salahaddin's deputy. In his book, Al-Asad ibn Mamati mentioned far-fetched and unlikely events, which it seems were fabricated. Salahaddin relied on Qaraqoosh with regard to running the kingdom, and were it not for his confidence in his knowledge and ability, he would not have entrusted that to him. The book by Al-Asad ibn Mamati is thus the origin of this saying, which became widespread in all regions, from the date it first appeared and until now. It is a small book that contains stories and funny anecdotes, written in the vernacular, discrediting the Emir Baha-ad-Din Qaraqoosh and showing him to be the opposite of what he really was. It makes him appear as a laughable character, like the character of Juha in the tradition of comic folklore. The aim of Ibn Mamati was to undermine the Emir Baha-ad-Din Qaraqoosh. Ibn Khalikan was of the opinion that this book was entirely fabricated, because Al-Asad ibn Mamati was close to, and indeed a part of the Ayyubid court, so how could he have denounced and condemned the system of which he was a part? In fact, the motive behind this book, which slandered the Emir Baha-ad-Din Qaraqoosh, Salahaddin, and the entire Ayyubid state, was a propaganda campaign and plan that was drawn up to undermine the Sultan Salahaddin and the Ayyubid state at the peak of its glory. The aim was to damage this state that played such a prominent role in putting an end to the Fatimid state and defeating the invading crusaders. What we can also be certain of is that the fact that the book was written in the form of a letter, offering advice to the Sultan Salahaddin in the vernacular, is indicative of the craftiness and malicious intent of its author. In fact, he managed to achieve his goal, which is borne out by the speed with which the lies contained in this book spread and were repeated by people as if they were true. Even Nasuyuti was influenced by it and narrated it to his students, as is seen in the Paris MS, even though he acknowledged that Emir Baha-ad-Din Qaraqoosh was a righteous man who was more inclined to do so. The aim behind the book Al-Fashush fi Ahkam Qaraqoosh was to shake people's confidence in the Emir Baha-ad-Din Qaraqoosh, who was a prominent leader and trustworthy assistant of Salahaddin, whose help the latter sought at times of crisis. This misinformation was intended to rally and incite the people against the Sunni Ayyubid state, which had put an end to Shiite Fatimid rule So the book was no more than a means of political propaganda against the Sunni venture. End of part 2 of chapter 5. End of chapter 5.